Do you know who's never bored? Um, no one, as it turns out. As it turns out, none of us are immune to this concept, to this idea of boredom. We don't always call it boredom, and hopefully that's become clear for you if you've been able to be a part of other parts of this message series. That sometimes our boredom manifests in different ways in our lives. It can be kind of tricky. We have 1,000 different ways that we react to boredom, things that we do to sort of mask it. We distract ourselves, essentially. That's some of what we're going to get into next week. But these days, because of phones and TV and food and even just exercise or mind wandering or maybe substance abuse, maybe we have so many different things that we do when we're bored, and when boredom is starting to sort of show up, that sometimes we would even say, well, I'm not really bored. Because I'm distracted, right? I'm not really bored. I meant to watch this entire season of this show tonight. I meant to watch 11 hours of television in one day. I'm not bored. That needed done today. And I've been there and I get it. And so that's one of the things that hopefully through this series you've begun to see the ways that boredom kind of manifests in the way that it's a little tricky at times. And this teaching series has been designed to help us identify boredom so that we can take steps towards living more present lives, where everything that we do has purpose and meaning and a value, and we sort of attribute every moment of our lives to something significant, that we're doing something with our lives. We're painting a picture with our lives. We're telling a story with our lives. And even when we're starting to feel a little bit bored, that we could look at that and we could say, yeah, but even this season has a purpose. I can do something in this season that I couldn't do in another. And so hopefully that has begun to happen for you. In Nehemiah, which is an Old Testament book, somewhere about halfway through the Old Testament, you'll find it's one of the last stories of the actual historical narrative of the Old Testament, the Jewish people, around the book of Nehemiah. And then Esther is kind of a strange book that sits right after that one. And then after Esther, you have no more historical writings necessary. There's a lot of poetry at that point. You get into the Psalms and the Proverbs and the Ecclesiastes and all of these wisdom writings, and then some prophetic works and all of these different things that don't exactly tell the history. So Nehemiah is one of the last stories of the history of the Jewish people, which is kind of an interesting thing, the last in the Old Testament before Jesus comes in the book of Matthew. And in this story, in Nehemiah, he's writing his own memoir, and he tells us in chapter 1 of his story that he's been approached by his family. His people have come to him, and they've basically said, the walls of our city are busted down, and the gates of our city have been burned with fire. We no longer have walls and gates. And at this particular time in human history, that leaves them in a very, very dangerous position. They really have no weaponry, no defense that really works very well without walls and gates. And, as it turns out, the Jewish people have been a very, very powerful nation for a very, very long time. And so they have a lot of people who are highly motivated to hurt them, highly motivated to inflict damage upon them because of the damage that they've inflicted on others for thousands of years. And so they're in a very dangerous position. And not only that, they're also humiliated. They used to run the show, right? They used to call the shots for the world, and now they're completely vulnerable to anything that the world wants to do to them. And so they come to Nehemiah and they say, we need walls and we need gates. And Nehemiah is a Jewish man who made it out of their city, made it out of the dangerous position that they were in, and had been appointed to a position in the king's courts as the king's cupbearer. Are we caught up? So he worked for the king directly and carried the king's cup around for him. And Nehemiah decides in chapter 1 to engage with this problem. He decides when his family comes in, he doesn't have to do anything, but he decides to. He says, well, if the walls need rebuilt, I might be the right person to help get that work started. And then he prays about it. That's what we talked about the second week. This is the first week we talked about problems and how really your purpose on this planet is likely to come from you choosing to pursue a problem that you don't have to pursue. That really, we spend a lot of our lives trying to avoid certain problems, and although maybe you should do that, some things, there are problems you should try to avoid, you won't find your purpose in the problems you try to avoid. You'll find your purpose in a problem you choose to engage. A problem you look at and say, that's the problem I want to solve with my life. That's the problem I want to address with my life. You'll find your purpose that way. That's what Nehemiah does. And secondly, he prays about it. He goes to God and says, if I'm going to do this with my life, I'm going to need some help, right? I'm going to need some backup on this. And then thirdly, he comes up with a plan. That's what we talked about last week. And all of these messages are available online if you'd like to catch up with them. You won't need those to understand today, but if you'd like to see them, you can check them out through a link on our website. And after he has these plans ready to go, we get to Nehemiah chapter 2, verse 16, and this is where I want to start today. It tells us, the scriptures tell us that the city officials did not know that I had been there. So he goes into the city and he's inspecting, he's looking at these torn down walls and the burnt gates and trying to determine what it is he's going to need to do. The people didn't know that I was there. They didn't know what I was doing. I had not said anything to anyone about my plans. These are the Jewish people. These are his own people. They don't know. He's not told anybody what he's doing there. And they're like, why is Nehemiah walking around the torn up walls with a tape measure, right? What is Nehemiah up to? He doesn't know. He hasn't told anybody yet. I had not spoken to the Jewish leaders, the priests, the nobles, the officials, anyone else in the administration. And so he's preparing to take action. And I want us to take a close look at what kind of action does he take. And this is where we're going to get most of the concept, the idea that I think we really need to hear today. Verse 17, so I said to them, you know very well the trouble we're in. Jerusalem lies in ruins and its gates have been destroyed by fire. Let us rebuild the wall of Jerusalem and end this disgrace. Then I told them about how the gracious hand of God had been on me, and about my conversation with the king, and they replied at once, yes, let us rebuild the wall. And they began the good work. So do you see what happened there? Do you see the first action that he takes? He identifies this problem, he prays about it, he comes up with a plan, and then what is the first action that he takes? What is the first action he takes to rebuild this wall? He invites other people into the problem. Invites other people along. Your purpose has something to do with other people. There is no life worth living that is all about you and not anyone else. There is no life worth living that doesn't involve helping other people and being helped by other people. You don't want to live life apart from community. Your purpose will be found in these relationships that you have with other people. Nehemiah is able to rebuild the walls of Jerusalem in a very, very short period of time because he recognizes an all-important element of operating in your purpose. And this is the first blank on your sermon notes. If you have those and you want to fill them in, I wanted to give you at least one blank that I could fill in for you. The other stuff, I'm not going to fill in those blanks. You are, hopefully. But this first blank is the word purpose. It's this statement. Your purpose is inseparably connected. I got a thesaurus the other day on my phone. Inseparably connected to helping other people and being helped by other people. Your purpose is inseparably connected to helping other people and being helped by other people. If you think your purpose on this planet is somehow disconnected from everyone else on this planet, respectfully, I think you're wrong. And I don't say that just to get a rise out of you. I don't say that just to hurt your feelings. I say that because I'm concerned that if you pursued a life that way, if you allowed yourself to live a life for selfish reasons and selfish intent and just pursued me, I'm just worried about getting what is mine and getting what I want for me, striving for selfish goals, you're likely to come to the end of your life and declare, this was not worth my life. That's why I think it's important that we have this conversation. That's why I think it's important that we remember my purpose is inseparably connected to other people. Because if we don't recognize that, we'll live our lives and declare this was not worth a life if it was all about me. No one lies on their deathbed and says things like, I just wish I had done more for me, right? Nobody's final words are those. Nobody says, I helped so many other people that it's kind of gross to me now, right? No one says that at the end. And I would even go as far as to say that if somebody does say something like that, none of us are inspired by that person, right? If we know people who have lived like that and just said, I just wish I had done more for me, we look at them and we say, how sad, they never got it. They never saw. No, none of us believe that that's true. We believe people matter on some level. We're inspired by people who give their lives away for others. Somehow we all know that we're here for each other. Somehow we know that people matter. People matter more than things, more than possessions, more than position. Somehow we know that the selfish life isn't the better life, right? We see that, hopefully. So Nehemiah chapter 3, if you were to read all of Nehemiah chapter 3, you would see these phrases like this. Then Eliashib, the high priest, and the other priests started to rebuild the sheep gate. The fish gate was built by the sons of Hassanah. Meremoth repaired the next section. The old city gate was repaired by Joiada. And it just goes on and on and on for an entire chapter. All of chapter 3 says name after name after name of people gathering together. And so I've decided to give you a glimpse into my paraphrase. I'm paraphrasing the Bible. It is the Drew Paraphrase Bible. Do we have that up there? The TDBPB. That's if you're looking in your YouVersion Bible app and you want to find my paraphrase. Here's my paraphrase of Nehemiah chapter 3. Everybody pitched in and everything got better, right? That's what all of chapter 3, and it does. I Googled it. Everything does, in fact, have 3 R's in a row. Trust me on this. That's what all of chapter 3 communicates. It worked. It worked. I knew it would. They're learning in the booth. They're learning if people laugh at his jokes, he moves faster. We all get to lunch faster for just laughing. So this entire chapter revolves around spreading the credit of the rebuilding of this wall across a huge community of people. And I want you to see this. I want you to see what's happening. As they're rebuilding this wall, guess what else is happening? They're rebuilding community. Right? The point, of course, they need a wall. Of course, they need gates. But the point is not the walls and the gates. God has not commissioned them to do this. God has not empowered them to do this because he needs walls and a gate. If he did that, and we believe he is who he says he is, he could just do it. Right? Why bother? He would do a better job of it than people. But they're not just rebuilding a wall and rebuilding gates. They're rebuilding community. They're rebuilding something that was lost along with their city as their walls fell, as their gates were burned. They lost their family. They lost their community. They lost their connection to each other. And as they rebuild the walls, they rebuild community. Nehemiah's plan to help these people is to get them working together, to get them on the same page. So I want to challenge you with 2 questions before we jump into another place in Scripture. I want to take this somewhere else and wrap up with Nehemiah. But I want to give you 2 questions first for you to consider. As you continue to stave off boredom in your life by pursuing your purpose, by wrestling with your purpose, engaging in who you are, I think there's 2 really important questions for you to consider today. They're the ones in your sermon notes. And the first one is this. I want you to consider, who am I helping? Who am I uniquely positioned to help with my life? Who has God given me access to that really nobody else has access to? Whose story breaks my heart? Who can I not talk about without getting choked up? Who am I helping with my life? I would maybe go as far as to make this statement that a life lived for yourself is not a life worth living. That leads to depression. I know that sounds like a pretty depressing statement. Well, that's because it leads to depression. A life lived for selfish things. You're likely, if you live your life pursuing selfish things, you're likely to get a lot of them, hold them in your hand, and say, this was not worth my life. This was not worth the pursuit. This was not worth the hours. This was not worth the money. This was not worth the energy. This was not as valuable as I thought it was. A life lived selfishly is not worth a life, I promise. A selfish life is not a better life. So who are you uniquely positioned to help? I want you to actually write maybe some names, maybe some groups of people, something for you to pray about. Whose needs matter to you a great deal? Who do you look around and you say, man, I really wish the church would help those people. I really wish the church would get involved in those needs. Who is that? Who is that? Because guess what? You're the church. Because guess what? Maybe you feel that way because God has positioned you uniquely to do it. Who am I helping? And secondly, the second question I want you to consider is this. Whose help do I need? This statement, a life you can accomplish on your own is a small life. Whose help are you going to need to enlist to actually hope to accomplish something significant with your life? You can do more with a community. I know that there are always outliers to a statement like that. A life, a life you can accomplish on your own is a small life. I know you could point out some people and say, well, like they didn't use anybody else and they did great things with their life. I would say, imagine how much more they could have done with a community. I mean, that's not, sure, there are outliers. Sure, they're doing. I'm not saying you can't do anything on your own. I'm just saying you can't do as much. I'm just saying you won't accomplish as great of things as you possibly could with your life if you're not engaged in a community. And let me ask the question this way. What teams are you on? Who's your team? Who else is trying to accomplish what you're trying to accomplish? Who else is moving this thing forward with you? Does that make sense? Who's working beside you? I want you to honestly maybe think of some names to write down there. Maybe think of some groups of people to write down there. Hopefully to some extent, and this is what the back half of the message that I have to share with you is about. Oh no, he's only halfway done. No, I'll move through the other part really quickly. You're going to make it to brunch. I want you to consider maybe Risen Church is part of that. Whose help do I need? I mean, hopefully the church can begin to connect you with who you can help in this community. And hopefully the church will also connect you to the people whose help you need. Hopefully we can be here for you in some significant ways. And maybe we can partner with each other to be here for others. I believe that the church, God's eternal church, the church is the right place to start answering both of these questions. Who am I helping? Well, I think who we're positioned to help is largely through the church. It begins here. It's not to say everybody's supposed to work for the church. It's not supposed to say, it's not even to say that my entire purpose, I'm a pastor of this church, and my entire purpose is not wrapped up in what happens from 10:30 to 11:30 on Sunday mornings. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying it kind of begins here for those of us who follow Jesus, that we would say the church is kind of the moment that we're reminded, oh yeah, we're here for other people. I mean, the last thing Jesus ever said to his disciples before he left the earth, as he built the church, this is how Jesus built the church. He said to his disciples, hey, go out and invite other people to know me too. Go out and bring other people in to experience. Go out and tell other people the good news that I died so that they might have life. Go out and tell people. So Jesus from the very start has been about this. Let's help some people. That's what this is for. And so hopefully the church begins the answer to that question for you. Now, with all that said, I want to take a step back from the story of Nehemiah. I want to kind of close the book on Nehemiah and consider something else significant here. I think there's something that I personally find very inspiring about the story of Nehemiah, and I think it's bigger than Nehemiah. And maybe it's something that you've caught on to too, and maybe it's something you've seen as we've talked about his story for the last week, like you've thought, oh, that kind of parallels with something else in the Bible. And I don't think that's an accident. I think it's important to say Nehemiah, real guy, historically documented, like everything that is said in the memoirs of Nehemiah actually happened. We know that it actually happened. There's historic proof of these walls being rebuilt around the time that this memoir was written. There's documented. Now, that being said, there's also something bigger about this story. This story is also a foreshadowing of something that would happen a few hundred years after these walls were rebuilt, and that would continue happening for thousands of years, and is also still sort of happening right now in this movie theater. That Nehemiah got to start the ball rolling on something really cool. See, Nehemiah holds this comfortable position as the king's cupbearer. Now, I've heard it said that perhaps the cupbearer is not a safe job because he has to drink the king's wine and eat his food before the king does. Not like Baby Bird style, like he doesn't like chew it up and spit it in the king's mouth. He tests it to see if it's poison. I don't think so. And he tests it to see if it's poison, and if it's not poison, if Nehemiah doesn't die, then the king eats it. Now, maybe that makes the job dangerous. To me, I would just say, I kind of doubt it. There's no historical document, there's no documentation in the scriptures of a cupbearer ever being poisoned. It's a dumb way to try to kill a king, isn't it? If you know there's a cupbearer and you try to poison the king by poisoning his wine, you a dummy, right? You're just going to kill the cupbearer and the king's going to be fine. So anyways, I think of it as a safe and comfortable position. He's in this position as sort of the right-hand man of the king. He just gets to eat the best food before the king does, gets to drink the best wine before the king does, gets to live in the biggest house in the neighborhood, probably the world, right? He's just living the life, and he chooses to step down from his position of authority and comfort because he sees the suffering and difficulty of his people, the people that he loves. And he decides to use his authority and use his position of privilege to help other people. Does that sound like anybody else in the Bible? You can quote me on this. One of the really cool things about the Bible is that it's all about Jesus. We see these shadows and pictures of Jesus. Now, the name of Jesus is not mentioned in the Old Testament at all, so most of the Bible does not even mention the name of Jesus. But we see his character at work. And really, whenever we look at the Old Testament, we see lots of stories of terrible, awful, violent things that don't sit well with us. And we say, oh, we don't want to be like that. And then we see other things like Nehemiah stepping down and putting the character of Jesus Christ on display, and something about those stories resonates with us. And we say, oh, I want to be like Nehemiah. I'm not sure I want to be like that other guy over there that was murdering all those people, but I like the idea. And we get to see the character of Jesus as a through line in the Old Testament, even setting up the dividing line that basically says, on this side are the things that don't look like the character of Jesus, and from those we learn what not to do. And on this side are the things that do look like the character of Jesus, and from those we learn what to do, right? That's why, and hopefully this doesn't offend you, I'm going into another place at the moment. I'm off the notes. I'm off the grid. Megan, get me back on in just a moment. But let me say this first, and then get me back on. We don't follow the Bible. That's a really dangerous thing to do. We follow Jesus, and the Bible helps us see who he is, right? If we follow the Bible, we end up in really, really precarious positions a lot. If we kind of say like, yeah, we follow the Bible, well, that's tricky, because a lot of the Bible is actually putting things on display that you shouldn't do. I heard, one really prominent example, and then I'll move on from this, is the idea of like polygamy all throughout the Old Testament. Like, well, if we follow the Bible, then we can be polygamous. Well, everybody who's practicing polygamy in the Bible is miserable, right? So the lesson is not, see, the Bible says there's polygamy, so we can marry as many wives and husbands as we want to. Well, those people are miserable. Those lives do not go well, so we follow Jesus. And this is what we see. This is why the story of Nehemiah resonates with us, is because it looks like Jesus. He steps down from a position of authority because of love, because he sees a need and wants to minister to that need. Jesus gives his life as a ransom for many and then establishes a community to save the world. And we're that community. We're that team. We're sort of continuing what Nehemiah got started and then what Jesus clarified and got started as the church. I believe with all of my heart that the local church is the hope of the world. It's where purposes begin. I believe that God's plan all along, and I hope you'll hear me for this if you checked out for a minute from all that other stuff. I totally get it. I hope you'll come back for just a second. Just let me speak this into you. I believe that God's plan all along has been to use broken, sinful, imperfect, selfish, angry, greedy, immoral people to tell the world that he loves them. That's his plan. I don't know why that's his plan. I don't know why God chose to use the church. I don't know why he has chosen to partner with broken people like me and like you. I don't know why he has chosen to use imperfect people to get this job done, right? I can't even remember my passwords on my computer, yet I've been entrusted with the most important message in all of human history. I can't even finish half of the Netflix shows that I start watching, right? I get 3 episodes in and I'm like, I just can't anymore, right? Nobody but me. I just check it out. It's too much. It's too many shows, too many episodes of everything, right? I can't stop eating Oreos, right? And this has been entrusted to me, even though I know that they're made from deer feces and dolphin tears. They're not. They're not. But be honest, would you stop if they were? Would you quit? Because what they are made of isn't much better. But we can't quit. But we've been entrusted with, like, why? Have you ever wondered that? Like, God, why? Why entrust that to us? Why leave the most important message in all of human history, the most important message in the universe? Why is it entrusted to us? Why are we the ones that are supposed to go out and invite? Why are we the ones that are supposed to tell people about your love? Why are you using this church? And perhaps Nehemiah could have asked the same question. Why use these people to build this wall? God, you could just do a better job of it yourself. And that's true. But they're not just rebuilding a wall. They're rebuilding a family. They're rebuilding a community. It's like, God, couldn't you just make better gates yourself? Couldn't you just grow the right trees up and then cut them in the right shape and then just put them in the right... Couldn't you just do that? Like, you built the whole world to begin with. Couldn't you just build it? It's like, yeah. But it's not about building gates and walls. It's about building community. God knows that our purpose is inseparably connected to other people, helping other people and being helped by other people. And so he built this structure, he built this church with that in mind, for you to be a part of. God's plan all along, he's been committed to empowering people to help people. I know, it's hippie Drew, communist Drew, coming out again. That's his plan. And I want to offer you a strange response to the question, why would God do that? If that's a question you've ever wondered, maybe you've never wondered it until today, but now you're like, well, yeah, I guess that is kind of a good question, Drew. Why would he entrust something so important to such broken vessels, to such imperfect people? Yeah, Drew, actually, I kind of think Jesus is great, but every time I look at the church, I see church people on TV, it's like, oh no, what are they going to do? What are they going to say? Maybe that resonates with you in some degree. Maybe you have that question like, God, why are the people who make up the church so messed up? Why wouldn't you use more perfect vessels for this? And I think we could find a pretty good response to that question. In 2 Corinthians chapter 12, the Apostle Paul has gone to God on multiple occasions. And towards the end of this chapter, actually at the beginning of this chapter, he's pleading with God and begging with God to make him more perfect. Paul is basically saying, I'm imperfect. I've got this problem. I've got these issues. I've got these things that I haven't been able to fix in myself, these habits that I go back to. There's a lot of speculation about what Paul is actually referring to. Maybe a physical ailment, maybe some sort of sickness. And he's like, God, why won't you perfect me a little more so that I'll have a little more authority with people, so people would look at me and they wouldn't see this habit. They wouldn't see this sin thing that I go back to all the time. Paul is the same person, remember, who also said in another place in Scripture, I know the right things to do and I can't seem to do them. I know the wrong things to do and I can't seem to stop doing them. Like, he's admittedly like this, and so maybe this is something of what he's saying in 2 Corinthians 12. Like, God, why don't you just give me a little stronger willpower? Why don't you just make me better at, keeping my word, doing what I say? And he goes to God over and over and over again, and he actually says, 3 times I pleaded with you, God, take this away from me. Make me a more perfect vessel. And this is God's response. And if you hear nothing else I say to you today, I hope that you'll hear this as something that God wants to speak to you. I think today is really, I don't think you're here by accident. I think God actually wants to speak something to the people in this room today. And here's what it is. Here's the response that Paul gets back when he says, God, why won't you make me more perfect? Why can't I be a more perfected vessel for you? Each time, he said in verse 9, this is God speaking to Paul, my grace is all you need. I pleaded, I begged, God, make me a more perfect vessel. Fix me. Make me perfectly holy. And each time I pleaded with him, God says, my grace is sufficient. My grace is all you need. And then he goes on further to say, my power actually works best in weakness. In other words, Paul, if I were to make you perfect, if I were to make you stronger, then it'd be you doing stuff and not me. You'd start to look to your own strength. You'd stop leaning on me. You'd start thinking that you're actually capable of this stuff. You'd start thinking you're actually good enough for this stuff. You'd start thinking that this is getting done because you're good at getting stuff done. You'd start thinking that these walls are going up and these gates are going up because you're really good. You're a really good contractor. Instead of recognizing, I couldn't do this. It's God working through me, an imperfect vessel. And so now, he said, so now I am glad to boast about my weakness, so that the power of Christ can work through me. And so maybe if you've had this question before, if you've asked, like, why use imperfect people? Why let the church be led by imperfect people? If Paul were perfect, people would trust in Paul, right? That's not the point. If I were perfect, I started today wearing a white shirt, and I spilled my strawberry banana smoothie on it. So now I'm in a black shirt. If you're wondering, like, why are you teaching a black shirt today? Seems like a white shirt day. You're right, it was. If I were perfect, you'd be tempted to put your trust in your pastor. If Megan were perfect, and I know what you see when you look at her. I know the activity that you see from her. I know you're thinking, like, need I remind you, though, she married me, right? So if at any point you're thinking, like, but Megan might be pretty close to perfect, you need to remind yourself, but she did marry Drew, so there's probably something up, and you'd be right? There's something up. If the people who led the church, the people who made up the church were perfect, you'd be tempted to trust them and not God, right? This is some of what God is showing us here. Paul begs, make me perfect. Why isn't the church a perfect organization? Well, because you're not supposed to trust the church. You're supposed to trust Jesus. We're a broken, imperfect vessel of saying God is so good that he'll use stuff like us. He'll use people like me, people who don't deserve to be standing here. God allows the church. I think this is a statement we have for the screen. God allows the church to operate, allows people to serve his church with flaws intact so that we'll trust him and not them. God, why do you let messed up people lead your church? So that you'll trust me and not them. God, why do you let the church be run by, why do you let people who are messed up and broken serve in churches and make up, so that people will trust Jesus and not the organization? Why are denominations so broken and messed up and splintered throughout? Why are we so split? So that we'll trust Jesus and not a denomination. Why doesn't God just make a perfect denomination? Because then we would trust that. We're like that. He knows that about us. And the point isn't to build a perfect thing, it's to build community. Perhaps it could be said that if the church were perfect, it'd be boring. If you guys want to come, would you, just the two of you would be fine, just to play a little music and maybe sing something at the end of this to seal the deal. Perhaps it could be said that if the church were perfect, it'd be boring. Maybe that's true. It's probably true. But more importantly than that, if the church were perfect, it couldn't be run by people. And so it couldn't help people. If this were a perfect system, if it were flawless, if there were no issues in it, we couldn't help each other. It couldn't be a community. Community is messy. Family is messy. So here's what I want to say to you today. If you're here and you're put together and you're perfectly moral and you're completely selfless and you're flawless in every way, admittedly, first of all, congratulations. And second of all, I don't want to meet you, I should say. There might be a moment where you're thinking, like, I'd like to meet you after. I'd rather not, actually. Admittedly, if that's you, the Church of the Risen Jesus isn't for you. Jesus himself said that. He said, I'm not here for healthy people. I'm not here for people who are convinced they don't need me. I'm here for people who are broken and know it. I'm not here for people who are so full of themselves and so self-righteous that they actually think that they deserve it. I'm here for people who would say over and over and over again, God's grace is all I need. If you're damaged goods, if you're flawed, seemingly beyond repair, if you feel like you don't deserve to be here, if you've made mess after mess after mess of your life, if you're riddled with guilt, shame, and anger, if you feel like a hypocrite often, then I think the church is for you. We want you on our team. That's what I'm saying. I want you to be a part of this. If that's you, I'm broken, I'm damaged, Drew, I'm flawed, I'm kind of selfish, pretty greedy at times. I get really sad, and when I'm sad, I hurt people. I'm addicted. I got problems in my life that I know are problems, and I'm not willing to address them. I'm not even willing to admit them. I don't even want to talk about them. Is that fine? Is that cool? Yeah, it's fine. I want you on this team. I want you to be a part of what we're doing here. We're building something together. And while we're building God's church, we're building a family. We're building community. He's always doing that. God wants that for your lives. We want you in our lives. We want to build the walls and gates of God's church beside you. Why? Why do we want broken, messed up people? Because that's what we are. Why do we want imperfect people? Because that's what we are. And we want to see God's strength made perfect in our weakness. We want to see Him at work. I don't want to see what we can do together. I want to see what we can do with God together. I want to live like His grace is actually all we need.